For 13 months, the people of one small West Virginia town watched a thing with wings and burning red eyes move through the dark at the edges of their lives. They saw it on the back roads. They saw it perched on their rooftops. They saw it standing motionless in fields at midnight, watching their houses with eyes that glowed like two coals in the black. And then, on the evening of December 15th, 1967, the bridge that connected their town to the rest of the world buckled during rush hour, and it dropped 46 people into the freezing Ohio River. The sightings stopped that night. All of them. As if the thing had only ever been there for one reason: to stand at the edge of the firelight and warn them about something that none of them could have seen coming. The town is called Point Pleasant, and the thing they saw has a name now. A name a wire reporter made up as a joke that stopped being funny almost immediately. Tonight, we're talking about the Mothman. There's a specific kind of fear that has nothing to do with claws or teeth. Most monsters threaten you directly. They chase you. They corner you. The danger is the monster itself. And once it's gone, the danger's gone with it. But there's an older, stranger fear. It's the fear of the Omen. The sign. The thing that appears in the sky before the plague. The comet before the fall of the king. The dog that howls at an empty doorway the night before a death in the house. The horror of the Omen is not that it hurts you. It's that it knows something you don't. It has seen the shape of what's coming, and it has come to stand in front of you wearing that knowledge. And you can't read it. You feel the weight of it. You feel that you have been warned. But you don't understand the warning until it's far too late to do anything about it. That is the Mothman, not a predator, a messenger. And the message was never good news. Imagine this. It's late, and you're driving back roads outside a small river town. To one side of you, there's an old abandoned munitions plant from the war. Rows of concrete domes sunk into the earth, half swallowed by weeds. The kind of place where teenagers go to park because no one else ever does. Your headlights sweep across the gravel. The igloos sit out there in the dark like the backs of buried animals. The radio's low. The heater ticks. There's no one else on this road. And then, just off to the shoulder, near the door of the old power plant, you see two red lights. At first you think they're reflectors, a road sign, some bit of glass throwing your high beams back at you. Red, round, set a few feet off the ground and spaced apart, about as far apart as a pair of eyes. Then, they move. Something rises up behind them, gray and tall, taller than a man, shaped like a man, but folded wrong, hunched under the weight of something on its back. The red lights lift with it, because the red lights are set into its face, and they have not blinked. And they have not looked away from you since the moment your headlights found them. You don't decide to leave. Your foot's already on the gas. The tires bite, and the car lurches, and you're doing 60 before you've drawn another breath. It's above you before you reach the highway. You can't see wings move. You only hear them. A heavy leathery beating, like a tarp snapping in a storm, and you feel the car shudder as something vast passes low over the roof. The speedometer climbs, 70, 80, 90, 100 miles an hour down a dark country road, and the shape stays with you the entire way, effortless, unhurried, matching you like you're standing still. It only peels away when you reach the lights of town. You'll spend the rest of your life telling people it was a big bird. You won't believe it for a second. You just met the Mothman. The legend has a date, and it's worth saying that out loud because that's what separates the Mothman from a campfire story. This isn't folklore handed down through centuries. This happened to real people in named places, and it was in the newspaper the next morning. It begins on November 12th, 1966. 5 men were digging a grave at a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia. It was the middle of the day. As they worked, something lifted out of the trees beside them. Something one of the gravediggers, a man named Kenneth Duncan, would describe as a brown man-shaped figure that flew low over their heads and was gone. They stood there in the open daylight, leaning on their shovels, and watched a winged man pass over a cemetery. That was the warm-up. 3 nights later, on November 15th, 2 young married couples went for a drive. Roger and Linda Scarberry, Steve and Mary Millette, all of them in their late teens and early 20s, out in a '57 Chevy on a Tuesday night with nothing to do. The way you are when you're that age in a town that small. They drove out to a place everyone there just called the TNT area. The old West Virginia Ordnance Works, an abandoned World War II munitions plant on the edge of town. Acres of wood and storage domes and dark, empty roads. Today it's a wildlife management area. Back then, it was just a spot where the dark got darker. As they passed the Old North Power Plant, they saw 2 red lights in the shadow of the building. They slowed down, and the lights, they realized, were eyes. It was shaped like a man, they said, but bigger. 6, maybe 7 feet tall, gray, with great folded wings on its back, and those 2 red eyes that caught the headlights and held them. Linda said later that she couldn't look away from them, that the eyes did something to you. Roger threw the car into a turn and floored it for the highway, and the thing spread its wings and went up after them. Not flapping, so much as rising, gliding, staying dead level with the car as they hit 100 miles an hour on the road back into town. They could hear the wings. They said it followed them all the way to the city limits before it broke off. They drove straight to the Mason County Sheriff's Office. And here's the part that matters. The deputy who took their statement, a man named Millard Halstead, did not laugh at them. He had known these kids most of their lives, and he could see that they weren't troublemakers and weren't drunk. They were genuinely terrified. So he drove back out to the TNT area with them that same night to look. He found no creature, but Halstead said that as he passed the spot where they'd first seen it, his police radio started making a sound he couldn't explain. A fast, garbled whine, like a record played at the wrong speed, coming through the speaker on its own. Then it stopped. He went home unsettled, and he believed them. The next morning, November 16th, the local paper, the Point Pleasant Register, ran the story under a headline that perfectly captured how little anyone knew what to do with it. It read roughly, "Couple see man-sized bird creature. Something." Word spread fast enough that the county sheriff, George Johnson, held a press conference to calm everybody down, to promise the town that, whatever this was, there was a normal explanation on the way. It did the opposite. A wire service reporter picked the story up, and because the Batman TV show was the biggest thing on the television that year, he tagged the creature with a name in the same spirit, the Mothman. The joke went national, and then it kept going. Here's the detail that should have stayed a footnote and didn't. That same night, the same night the Scarberrys and Millettes were sitting in the sheriff's office, about 90 miles away in Salem, West Virginia, a building contractor named Nero Partridge was at home, watching TV, when the screen suddenly died. A strange pattern flooded the glass, and from outside came a high whine that rose in pitch, like something winding up. His dog, a German shepherd named Bandit, was out on the porch, and he started to howl. Not bark, howl, fixed on the hayfield beside the house. Partridge grabbed a flashlight and swept it across the field, and 2 red discs lit up in the beam, low to the ground, looking right back at him. He said later they were like the reflectors on a bicycle. Bandit tore off into the dark after them. Partridge never saw his dog again. He called for him that night, and the next day, and Bandit was simply gone. And when he finally read the Mothman story in the paper, one line in it put him cold. The Scarberries had mentioned passing the body of a large dog lying by the road out near the TNT area that night, and that when they drove back past the same spot, only minutes later, it had vanished. 2 men, 90 miles apart, the same night. What happened over the next 13 months is the part skeptics have the hardest time with. It wasn't one sighting. It wasn't 4 scared kids. From November of 1966 through December of 1967, more than 100 people in and around Point Pleasant reported seeing the same thing. Different nights, different roads. People who had never met each other, who had no reason to coordinate, describing the identical creature down to the details. The same gray, man-shaped body, the same wingspan, and every single time, the same 2 glowing red eyes. Some of the reports came with physical effects. Witnesses said their eyes burned for days after looking at it. A deep, raw irritation, like a bad sunburn on the inside of the eye. One young woman, Connie Carpenter, said she came face to face with it in daylight and suffered exactly that, a burning in her eyes that lasted for days. Others described what the first 4 witnesses had, that when the eyes locked onto you, you could not break away. Your body simply stopped obeying you. And it wasn't only the creature. The whole town seemed to come unstuck. People reported strange lights moving in the sky over the TNT area, phones that rang with no one on the line, or with sounds on the line that weren't voices, houses with sudden poltergeist activity, objects moving, electronics dying, dogs that went out into the dark to investigate and didn't come back. The town developed the specific grinding paranoia of a place that's begun to feel watched. Because it had. Now here's where the Mothman starts turning into something stranger than a cryptid. 2 weeks before the Scarberries ever saw those red eyes, on November 2nd, 1966, a sewing machine salesman named Woodrow Derenberger was driving home along Interstate 77, just up the road from Point Pleasant. He said a vehicle came up behind him fast, swerved in front of him, and forced him to stop. It wasn't shaped like a car. It hovered just off the pavement, dark and windowless, glistening in his headlights. A panel opened, and a man stepped out. The man looked almost normal, tanned, dark hair combed back, dressed in a strange, shiny coat. He was smiling, and Derenberger said that the man spoke to him without moving his mouth. The words simply arrived inside of his head. The first thing it said was that it meant him no harm. It told him its name was Indrid Cold. If that smile sounds familiar, it should. Around the same stretch of time, a family in Point Pleasant, the Lillies, reported lights over their home and things moving in the night. One night, their grown daughter woke up to find a large man standing over her bed-locked house, just looking down at her, grinning. When she screamed and looked again, he was gone. People started calling this figure the Grinning Man. The same broad, fixed, wrong smile, the same out-of-place politeness, an entity that seemed to be performing the idea of a friendly man without quite understanding how a man actually behaves. If you listen to those who study these things, that detail, the rehearsed friendliness, the too smooth reassurance, the instance that it means you no harm, shows up again and again in encounters all over the world. Something that needs you to lower your guard. Something that knows the words, but not the music. Then came the men in black. Several witnesses, and at least one local reporter, said they were visited by pale, oddly dressed men who knew things that they shouldn't have, who behaved like they'd learned to be a human from a manual, and who had one message: stop talking about what you saw. 2 reporters anchor this entire story, and they're the reason we can take it as seriously as we do. The first was a local woman named Mary Heyer. the Point Pleasant correspondent for our Ohio paper, the Athens Messenger. She was the person the town trusted with its strange news. People brought their sightings to her, and she wrote them down, carefully, for over a year. She was also harassed for it. Strange visitors, strange phone calls, the works. And shortly before that December, Mary Hyre had a nightmare she couldn't shake. She dreamed of people drowning in the river at Christmas time, of wrapped presents floating in the water among the bodies. The second was a writer from New York named John Keel. He was a serious investigator of the unexplained, and he came to Point Pleasant to dig into the sightings firsthand. He interviewed the witnesses. He interviewed Derenberger. And while he was there, he started getting phone calls of his own, a voice that identified itself as Indrid Cold, that seemed to know his movements, and that warned him to stay away from Point Pleasant because something terrible was going to happen there. Keel didn't think he was chasing a big bird anymore. He came to believe that the Mothman wasn't an animal at all, but something far older and stranger, an intelligence that doesn't cause disasters, but appears in the days and weeks before them. A harbinger, a thing that shows up to watch and maybe warn when a place is about to be wounded. He laid all of it out in a book in 1975. He called it The Mothman Prophecies. Decades later, it became a film with Richard Gere, but the title is the thesis. Keel wasn't describing a monster. He was describing a prophecy with wings. December 15th, 1967, 10 days before Christmas. It was rush hour, just before 5 in the evening. The Silver Bridge, a 40-year-old suspension bridge that carried the main road across the Ohio River, connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio, was packed bumper to bumper with cars full of people heading home, Christmas shopping piled in their back seats. Deep inside the structure, in a single steel link holding up the span, there was a tiny flaw, a crack smaller than your fingernail, hidden for years, corroding out of sight. At 4:58 that evening, under the cold and the weight, it finally let go. Witnesses said that there was a sound like a gunshot. And then, in under 30 seconds, the entire bridge folded and dropped into the river. "31 vehicles went into the water. 46 people died in the dark and the cold of the Ohio. 2 of them were never found. To this day, it remains one of the deadliest bridge collapses in American history. And Mary Hyre's nightmare came true exactly. People drowning at Christmas with their wrapped presents floating around them in the river. The Mothman was never reliably seen in Point Pleasant again. The lights stopped. The visits stopped. Whatever had been standing at the edge of that town for 13 months simply wasn't there anymore. It was as if it had only ever come to say one thing. And once that thing was said, once the river had taken what it came to warn about, there was no longer any reason to stay. So, what was it? The skeptics have answers, and some of them are quite reasonable. The most famous belongs to Dr. Robert L. Smith, an associate professor of wildlife biology at West Virginia University, who told reporters the whole thing was a sandhill crane, the second largest crane in North America, nearly as tall as a person, with a 7-foot wingspan and a patch of bare red skin around its eyes that would flare in headlights. He figured one had simply wandered off its migration route, which is exactly why nobody local recognized it. A strange bird that far from home, in the dark, rising up out of an abandoned munitions field, could absolutely terrify a carload of kids. Add in tired eyes on long night drives, and the way fear spreads through small towns until everyone starts seeing what everyone else is seeing. And you have a tidy explanation. Others point at the ground itself. That TNT area had spent decades soaked in the chemical waste of wartime explosives manufacturing. Some wondered whether the contamination was affecting the people living nearby, and some married the two theories together. picturing an ordinary crane warped by that poisoned ground into something genuinely malformed. These are fair arguments, but they run into the same wall that every one of these legends runs into: the consistency. A startled crane doesn't explain 100 separate witnesses describing the same gray body and the same red eyes for over a year. It doesn't explain the burned eyes. It doesn't explain a man being stopped on the highway 2 weeks earlier by a smiling stranger who spoke inside of his skull. It doesn't explain a reporter's nightmare matching a disaster down to the floating Christmas presents. And it doesn't explain why, the instant the bridge fell, all of it simply stopped. So the believers have their own answers, and they get stranger as they go. Some say it was a cryptid, a real unknown flesh and blood creature, a living echo of the giant winged thunderbirds in Native American tradition that were themselves said to appear before storms and disaster. Some tie it to an old local curse, a story that a dying Shawnee leader cursed the land at Point Pleasant generations ago, and that the town has paid for it ever since. And some side with John Keel, that the Mothman's not a creature you could ever shoot or cage, but an intelligence that operates outside our understanding of time. Something that sees the catastrophe coming and is drawn to it, the way we slow down to look at a wreck. People have reported Mothman-like figures before other disasters in other countries, in the days before bridges fell and reactors failed. If that's true, then it was never the monster. It was the warning the monster carried. And that brings us back to the dread, because the fear people felt looking into those red eyes was not the fear of being eaten. Witnesses didn't describe a hunter. They described being seen, pinned, recognized. The fear of standing in front of something that already knows how your story ends and cannot, or will not, tell you. Linda Scarberry saw the Mothman more than once after that first night. She saw it on her roof. She saw it for years, in her dreams and out of them. And it followed her in some sense for the rest of her life. And when she talked about it later in her life, she didn't describe it as something that wanted to kill her. She said it never tried to hurt her. She came to believe, in the end, that it had only ever been trying to communicate, that it wanted to tell her something. She just never figured out what. Before I close, I want to be careful with one thing. Point Pleasant is a real town. The Silver Bridge was a real bridge. And the 46 people who died in that river were real. Mothers and fathers and kids, 10 days before Christmas, with presents in the back seat that they never got to give. It's easy with a story like this to get so caught up in the monster that you forget the grief underneath it. The people of Point Pleasant didn't lose a legend that December. They lost their neighbors. They turned a winged shadow into a mascot over the years, a festival, a statue downtown, and I think they did that in the way any of us would, by making the thing we fear into something we can stand to look at. So when we tell it with respect for them. The dread is theirs. The loss is theirs. We're only borrowing the dark for a little while. With that said, I'm not going to pretend this one doesn't get under my skin, because it does. The Mothman's not like the things we usually talk about on the show. It doesn't walk into your house. It doesn't call your name in a voice you love. It doesn't run beside your car to drag you out of it. It just watches, from a rooftop, from a field, from the dark mouth of an old building beside an empty road, and it waits for you to notice it. So, here's the only warning that fits. If you're ever driving alone some night, and 2 red lights at the edge of the road resolve into a pair of eyes that will not look away from you, understand what you're looking at. It's not hunting you. It came to tell you that something is coming. The only question that's ever mattered, the one the people of Point Pleasant never got to answer in time, is whether you'll understand the warning before it arrives.